Okay, so welcome back to week 7 of The Artist's Way. This week is one of the more exciting weeks, in my opinion. This week is titled Recovering a Sense of Connection. The chapter focuses largely around what we connect with in ourselves, both our input artistically, in terms of listening to ourselves and working out what our genuine creative interests are, as well as what gets in the way of our output, what stops us from turning those things into art. It concentrates on two enemies of the artistic practice: jealousy and perfectionism. Now, I know for certain that most dancers in particular suffer from very severe, sometimes, jealousy at the abilities of others or what they may be getting in terms of work. And also, perfectionism is just rife in the dance world. We can be so nitpicky about things that don't necessarily matter as much as we think they do. So the first of three themes presented in this chapter is the idea of listening, in the sense of listening to ourselves, listening to our inner voices, our inner inspirations, the things that we genuinely care about. Julia Cameron draws our attention to the idea that through our morning pages practice and through our artist's date practice, we have been getting in touch with the things that genuinely inspire us and have allowed ourselves to push past our inner censor. Through listening, we are encouraged not to think up ideas, but rather to get ideas down, taking what ideas we have, or even these kinds of little niggles and tiny little subconscious concepts that flow through our minds, down onto paper, or putting the brush to the canvas, or putting the foot to the dance floor. The idea is that we are a conduit channeling this artistic and creative flow. The chapter gives the example of Michelangelo, who is said to have remarked that he released David from the stone he found him in, almost as if the artworks that we would make in the future are waiting for us and we need to reach into ourselves, grasp them, and allow them to come into materialization. This idea is not too different from ideas I've heard from well-known choreographers. Akram Khan, for example, I remember him explaining that he thinks of his dance pieces being akin to a child, that he raises them, but at some point he needs to let them go. At some point he releases control over what he's doing to those pieces, and they kind of become their own personality, their own being, and they start going off in their own direction, in their own path. Similarly, Russell Malafant spoke to us about how you can create with a plan ahead, where you have a sense of what it's going to look like, and choreograph by kind of putting everyone in their place and telling them how you want it to be. Or, and he actually used this image of chipping away at the stone and seeing what reveals itself, so that you would get into a studio with some dancers and start kind of moving, giving suggestions, giving ideas, and seeing what starts to present itself. Julia Cameron then goes on to talk about how perfectionism can get in the way of this process. She talks about how perfectionism is not really anything to do with your work, anything to do with what you're looking at in front of you, but instead a state of being. It is not you kind of being humble about your work and thinking about what could improve it. Instead, it's you being kind of egotistical and driven to be the best or appreciated for it, or you essentially can't bear the idea that any mistakes are made. But actually, these mistakes may be very important if they're flowing from within. You may notice them later and see them as insights into what you think or what your interests are, rather than kind of technical mistakes. An example that I see a lot in dance from a kind of technical perspective only, just talking about the technical perspective for a second, is how dancers might be modifying a movement because doing that movement is actually not good for them. And then sometimes they look in the mirror or they look at a video and they start trying to fix it because it doesn't look technically right in their mind, aesthetically right in their mind. Later down the line, correcting that into something else becomes an injury. And if you had instead allowed it to just kind of flow out and observe it without being like, oh, I really need to tweak this thing, then maybe you would have noticed that you were not going there because it was painful. Equally, in a more kind of artistic setting, you may find yourself worrying about what people are going to think about a certain idea, Like maybe you're looking at your own work and you're going, oh, that kind of comes across as offensive or wrong or not what I believe in. And actually, maybe inside it is what you believe in, and that is worth investigating, not shying away from. Perfectionism is something that blocks you from getting on with the work, from moving on to the next stage. It makes you stuck at a particular section of choreography without looking at the whole piece. It makes you go over the counts again and again instead of caring about what the meaning is in the movement. If you're doing a narrative, it gets you stuck at a certain part of the story rather than just allowing it to flow, and you come back to it later and you let the rest present itself before you worry about going back and fixing it. It can even it kind of present itself in an application for funding, and you're worrying about where commas go, and maybe you just need to write it down first, come back to that stuff later. It's not so important. Care about the ideas, let things flow, let things come out onto the page, and we can always shape them and sharpen them a bit later. But perfectionism as we go is not so useful. A really beautiful way of thinking about when a piece is finished is not that it is ever finished, but instead that it stops in interesting places. Just think about how many things you might try, how many different art forms, how many different styles, how many different concepts, or how many aesthetics or methods or anything, if you didn't have to worry about getting it perfect. There are so many avenues available to us that we block ourselves from exploring because we know that we're not the expert. We know that we're not going to be doing that perfectly. But we should still allow ourselves to go down that route. We can cut it later if we really want to, but it is worth exploring in the first instance at least. The next thing that Julia Cameron goes on to speak about is jealousy, and how jealousy is really a mask to fear. Fear that we won't be able to get what we want, or that we won't be able to do it to the standard that other people have who have come before us, or a frustration that we feel that somebody else is getting what is rightfully ours. At its root, jealousy is this kind of stingy emotion that doesn't allow us to open up our minds to the prospect that everybody could be creating what they want, and everybody could be kind of integrating their art and working together, and no one needs to be stepping on each other's toes. There is enough room for more than one poet, more than one dancer, more than one choreographer, and we can do it in similar or different ways to each other. Julia Cameron proposes an exercise for overcoming our jealousy called the jealousy map. The jealousy map is really very simple. It goes with who, why, and what action. The idea being that we look at who makes us feel jealous, why they make us feel jealous, and what action can we do to actually go and get that thing that we want. The thinking being that what is really making us jealous is not this other person who's getting the things that we want, but rather we're not doing anything to go and get that thing. Take care, and I'll see you next time.